everyone, thank you for being here, and please stick around for the next hour and several hours. I am so excited and privileged and honored to introduce to all of us Peter Sanders. I am meeting him for the first time on this Zoom call. So thank you, Peter, for being here. Thank you for taking the time, and really looking forward to hearing from you and seeing, inshallah, your photographs and learning about your journey, about your books, particularly your most recent book, Meetings with Mountains. As I'm sure many of you know, Peter is an extraordinary photographer. He is the world's preeminent photographer of the Muslim world. He started photographing 5 decades ago in the 1960s, started by capturing rock icons like Jimi Hendrix and Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, and then journeying through the world and really capturing the beauty and sharing the beauty of Islam in various different ways. He has over 500,000 images that he's captured, many of which are in his various books. He exhibits around the world, and he is one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world. Such a privilege to have you with us, Peter. Thank you to Soraya for connecting us. And what we decided to do is Peter has arranged a presentation of his photographs. I asked if he wouldn't mind sharing his life journey, his personal and professional journey through his photographs. So we're going to see if this works. And Peter, welcome. Welcome to the Concordia family. Welcome to this session, and thank you. And let's see if we can make the technology work to see your presentation and to hear you.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It sounds okay?
Yes.
Good. I'm gonna, as we discussed, I'm gonna do a presentation. It's called Searching for Light. And it's kind of a journey. I was asked to do an exhibition in Turkey last year, and I thought they'd want the obvious things that I usually do. They said they want a retrospective, and I said, you know, a retrospective includes all my music stuff, and they said, yeah, that we want to see it. So we worked on an idea that I'd been kind of nurturing for a little while, and I've kind of cut it down a bit just to try and keep within the half-hour limit that you gave me. But I think so. Let's see if this works. I need to share the screen.
Peter, please continue as you need to. We've got an hour for our session, and we can, you know, friends on the call, please include your questions on the chat. And if you don't mind, Peter, if questions come up, I may just ask you as you're presenting, if that's okay. Otherwise, we'll continue the conversation after your photographs.
Hang on a minute, it's not doing it now, so let me go out again.
Peter, can you see share screen at the bottom? I've made you a co-host. So if you click on share screen.
Yeah. But what I can't do is see my presentation.
So it's not coming up as one of the screens from your computer?
Yeah, I think this is it. I think this is it. Okay, let's try this.
There you go. We see it.
You see it?
Yes.
And can you see Peter Sanders' photography?
Yes, awesome.
Okay. Bismillah.
Bismillah, that's great.
Rabbi Ishra li sabri wa yasila amru wa ta'khudh min salih qawli Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam. Bismillah. So as I said, it was called Searching for Light, an Odyssey of Peace. And it's divided into 4 sections. So the first section is stage 1, which I call the beginnings. And these are signs in a new age. And this is really where I started doing photography. And this is one of the very early pictures I did. Sorry. It's one of the very early pictures I did in sort of early mid-60s. And it's kind of ironic when I look at it today, because this is what a lot of people are thinking at this moment. So, And then this was the 60s. So this was the beginning of peace and love and the hippies and that whole very kind of interesting time that I was involved in. And I discovered these girls sitting up on Hampstead Heath in London, and I got to know them and their parents and their whole families. And we all became good friends. And this was a sentiment at the time, you know, what if we gave a revolution and everybody came? This was sprayed on a wall in Berkeley, California. And close friends and members of the aristocracy started to drop out and embrace a more natural way of living. The youth danced, played music, sang, painted, anything that stopped them feeling oppressed. They just wanted their spirits to feel free. Because this was, right, you know, this was 20 years after the Second World War, and people were really just wanted life to be enjoyable. And anyway, you get the idea. Everybody was searching for their own light. You know, the Cold War was still going on, the wars in Vietnam and Cambodia, and protests started breaking out around the world against this. And there was really a very strong anti-war feeling amongst the youth. You know, and more than any other medium, music became the voice of our generation, and the songwriters and the musicians became the poets of a new age. I became swept up in the music world and became an eyewitness to the energy and creativity of these artists and future icons. So you have Bob Dylan, who was singing anti-war songs, among many other things, singing about the masters of war that build all the guns, who build the death planes, who build the big bombs, and you that hide behind walls and you that hide behind desks. I just want you to know I can see through your masks. There is one thing I know, though I am younger than you, even Jesus would never forgive what you do. These were very strong words for us at that time. And when I read them and hear them, they're still very powerful even to today. Give me shelter. War, it's just children, it's just a shot away. You know, that's it. There was this kind of feeling that just World War III could break out at any time. The Doors. He used to sing, Jim Morrison sang, "This is the end, beautiful friend, this is the end, my only friend, the end." The Who talking about our generation, I hope I die before I get old. That was the sentiment, you know. There wasn't much to look forward to. Somebody gave Eric Clapton a copy of Layla and Majnun by Nizami. And from that, he was inspired to write one of his greatest hits, Layla. One of the lines is, "Layla, you got me on my knees." Mark Bolan, who was a friend of mine, and he died very young. He died at the age of 29 in a car crash. There were a lot of people in that culture died very young, either from drugs or just the kind of lifestyle. Jimi Hendrix sang this song. It's actually a Bob Dylan song, but there are many among us who feel that life is but a joke, so let's not talk falsely now, the hour is getting close. And this was Jimi Hendrix' last concert, and I was looking to get money to go to India because I wanted to get away from the culture at that time, and I didn't have the money. And Jimi Hendrix was playing at the Isle of Wight, and I went and photographed him. And 2 weeks later, he passed away. He died from an overdose of drugs. And I sold the pictures I'd taken of him at the last concert and got the money I needed to go to India. So indirectly, Jimi Hendrix was a means to my journey to India. I remember seeing this graffiti painted on a wall in a street near where I lived. And I remember thinking it was like a message to me. It kind of said something, we teach all hearts to break. And it stuck with me. And then later when I started to read the Quran, I remember reading this ayat, we shall show them our signs upon the horizon and within themselves. So the second stage is called the search. And in 1970, I set out on a search to find a faith and a spirituality so absent from my society. A year later, I traveled to India, which for my generation seemed to hold out hope for a spiritual realization. I found at the core of every religion there is the same goal, to know the divine reality. Wherever I have traveled since that time, I have found beauty in faith and devotion. And in India, one of the places I went to was this a retreat of a great saint of India called Ramana Maharishi. He was a 20th century Hindu sage and who found enlightenment by asking himself the all-important question, who am I? And this was the question I had begun to ask myself. And as I searched around India, I was beginning to understand all the different religions and study them and began to kind of get some understanding of what they were trying to teach us. In India, I was confronted with extreme poverty, but I found a moving faith and a deep spirituality within the people. I traveled to a Sikh colony in the north and I met great men of piety, presence, and wisdom. This was at a Sikh colony in the north near Amritsar. And when I look at this picture now, the young boy reminds me maybe of myself sitting with these very old and wise and respecting members of that community. In Hindu ashrams around India, I found myself in large crowds of disciples, including many Westerners, all on their search for spiritual enlightenment. Within Buddhism, I found a great stillness. This stillness and the habit of doing without is a very stark contrast to the frenetic pace and materialism of the modern world. You know, reflection in Islam, it's, you know, to spend a few moments of reflection is considered, you know, many months of praying. And I think we're all being forced now with this kind of confinement that we're all experiencing to really reflect on our lives and what's happening. This was in a Christian monastery in Senegal. And I found this quote by Yunus Emery, where he said, I tried to make sense of the 4 books until love arrived and it all became a single syllable. And then the world of Islam appeared on my horizon. In the early 70s, radicalization and extremism had not yet appeared in Muslim societies, and it was easy for me to knock on that door. So then the third stage is called a leap of faith, really finding my path through the world of Islam. You can imagine as a Westerner and traveling the world and experiencing so many different things within Muslim countries was, you know, very educational. And, you know, I went to Mauritania, and I was dropped off in this place, and my driver just said, "Assalamu alaikum," and drove off into the distance. And there I was in the remote part of the desert. There were, I think, like 3 tents like this, and that was it. And a bit like the coronavirus, once I accepted my situation and I began to wander around with my camera, I began to discover this place. And I remember seeing Sheikh Abdul Rahman praying outside his tent. And I got very excited it's a very classic photo. You don't see it very often these days, but you know, these people have such nobility, even despite their extreme hard lives and deprivation. And sacred spaces, you know, I've visited many sacred spaces around the world, and some of them, of course, very exceptional. And they're not always the most expensive ones. I remember visiting a mosque that was built out of branches by lepers in a leprosy camp in Sudan, but it was a very beautiful place. You know, within our community, there's a lot of humanity and trauma. And in all the decades I've traveled throughout the Islamic world, I've been an eyewitness to the upheavals and conflicts and tragedies and traumas that have beset their societies. What I have seen and photographed is sometimes heartbreaking, but I've also seen the beauty and resilience of the human spirit that shines through every adversity. I went to Kosovo right after the war, and I remember it was a very shocking experience. And this was a program for children to teach them about the dangers of mines that are buried very close to the pathways. And I remember seeing the purity of these children. I went to Sudan during the drought and famine conditions in the early 80s. And these 7 years of drought and 7 years of famine had reduced the Darfur nomads to extremely heartbreaking conditions. You know, when people hide their faces, you know that they cannot face the world anymore. These were such beautiful people, and seeing them in these very confined circumstances was really heartbreaking. I remember seeing this boy. Something struck me about the aura of this child, an orphan. He was wearing Quranic amulets around his neck, and he was standing all the while the others queued for their food. I went to Iran during the Iranian Revolution, and I was somebody that had read all the great Persian mystics, you know, Sana and Rumi, and so many of them. This was my introduction into the world of Islam. And then I found myself in Iran at the time of the revolution and the Americans hostage. And it was a very different experience. And I found it hard to equate the two things. But there were moments, always within these things, there are moments of beauty. I've been blessed to visit many of the sacred sites. To tread on the land of the prophets in the footsteps of saints is an inestimable gift. I've been blessed to have walked on the sacred earth and worshipped at the houses consecrated by God for his servants. This was when I did the Hajj in 1971, and that experience was, well, very overwhelming for me. But the few pictures that I took, I treasure because it was a very different Hajj to nowadays. This is on Arafat. No, this is not Arafat, this is Muzdalifah. It's Muzdalifah. When I first saw the sacred house in Mecca in 1971, when I entered the Haram, it completely filled my vision. And I remember thinking about this for years. And in the 1990s, I was given total access to the Mecca and Medina. And that gave me the idea for this particular image that I did then. This area usually is locked off, but one day I went up there and the gate was open, and I spent a beautiful afternoon wandering around above the old Ottoman section of the mosque. And it was very beautiful. It was a late part of the day, and I took a lot of what I consider beautiful pictures. And I thought the next day I would do the same, but the gate was was firmly locked up the next day. I think they'd been watching me on the camera, and they quickly reminded them to go and lock the gate up again. I've been to Jerusalem several times, and the noble sanctuary is truly a sanctuary. I think for me, the importance of Jerusalem is that it links Islam with all the previous prophets. And I think that's what's spiritually very significant about the place. This is obviously when I did this presentation, I had not finished my project, my 50-year project, but my journey has been nourished by the company of the saints and sages I've met along the way. Meetings with Mountains is a project that has taken the better half a century to photograph the true saints and sages of the Muslim world. These people do not talk about peace, they are peace itself. And I hope maybe when we have a talk, maybe we can talk more about this project, because it has preoccupied a lot of my life. And we finally published the book last year, so I finally achieved it. But, you know, this is the image that we used on the cover. And really it's this analogy of these people being like mountains or like pegs. You know, in the Quran, God talks about the mountains as pegs to the earth. And these people are also pegs for us as humankind. This is in the old 1,000-year-old mosque in Beijing. A quiet Muslim sits reading Quran and fanning himself by the window. There are many saints, some are known and many unknown. Some are so unknown that if you were to expose them, they would move to another city. Their job is just to pray for mankind and to serve them. The first time I laid eyes on Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayer was at a barbecue in California. He sat peacefully wrapped in his Mauritanian robes, a sea of tranquility in the middle of a noisy, crowded gathering. Sidi Hussein lived in a mud palace in the rose-growing region of the Moroccan desert. He owned an old American saloon car, which was slowly becoming covered in dust, as he preferred to ride his white horse to the mosque to lead the prayers. And this was in his house. This was the color of the house. It's in the rose-growing region of Morocco in the Saharan desert. And this was the color of the room. And there was nothing in there, just handmade Moroccan carpets. Beautiful. In South Yemen, in the valley of Hadramaut, this man appeared before me. I gestured to my camera, just to not acknowledge that, to make sure he was comfortable with it. And he didn't run away. After taking several frames, he disappeared. My friends exclaimed that he had never allowed anyone to take his photo before. I felt honored that he had allowed me this privilege. His name was Farid, which means unique. I was invited by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf to come and meet his teacher at that time, Sheikh Marabat al-Hajj in Mauritania. And he showed me a very bad video, but it was enough for me to know that I needed to go and visit this man. And we traveled, it took us 24 hours to get there across the desert. And I was introduced to him. And it was a very interesting exchange because he asked my name and they repeated my name and he was quiet. Now, the only way I can describe this transaction is if it was the CIA, they would go to their mainframe computer and check you out. But his wisdom came from somebody much higher than that. And he was quiet. And then he said, Naam, Naam, like he knew who I was. And then he raised his hands and he prayed for me, a long prayer. And to me, that was the transaction with him. I don't speak Arabic. I couldn't discuss sections of fiqh with him or Quran or anything. But the rest of the time after this meeting, I just spent my time watching him and photographing everything that happened around him. He was in his 90s at that time. He spoke very little. He slept for only 2 hours a night. He only ever drank camel's milk. And this is what he would do all day. If he wasn't praying, he would be sitting with his students. And this was his daily routine every day until he died. He really was a mountain, a man of incredible presence. In 2006, I traveled to Syria before the war to photograph the great saints of this historical country. It's said that Sheikh Ahmed al-Habal of Damascus never missed the dawn prayer in the Umayyad Mosque for 80 years. He died at the age of 104. And the final stage in this retrospective is really where I feel I'm at now, is about celebrating life and giving back. Muslim social life is marked by celebrations and giving. The act of feeding the guest and greeting the stranger is fundamental to Islam, and providing food and clothing and shelter for the needy is a Muslim's duty. As a photographer, I've been able to capture the beauty of Islam in all its many facets, not least in the spirit, the open-hearted generosity one finds among the believers. So this section is really images that I think illustrate that. I did a project in 2005, 2007, called The Art of Integration. And it was really about Muslims in England to try and show that they were not all extremists, that they were serving the society. And this was a charity where Muslims would go every Sunday and feed the homeless and the drug addicts on the street and give them food. And it was really amazing to see this. And it was an honor for me to be allowed to photograph it. In Luton, there's a thing called the Curry Kitchen, which was set up by a family, and they go and feed all the homeless on the streets of Luton every Friday. And I found this quote by Muhammad Ali, the boxer, which said, "Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth." I thought that was very apt. I spotted this on Delhi station, and this boy had just obviously needed a shower and dropped down onto the tracks. And there was a water faucet. I guess they use it for cleaning the trains, and he just turned it into an instant shower. In Hassan II Mosque in Casablanca, on the piazza area outside, I saw this boy using it as a skating rink. And these moments of they're just like pure joy for me. This is down in the desert in Sahara. And I saw the word cool written on the street. So I just, on the wall there in the street, and I just waited for something to enter that frame to give it an added dimension. And very soon these beautiful women in their beautiful clothes walked into the frame. This was at an orphan school in Gambia, and I was just watching the children, and suddenly they broke out dancing. It was just like another instant of joy, you know. Here on the island, Comoros Islands, which is off Africa, on the east coast, there's a small island called the Comoros Islands, and one of the great saints of the island was a man called Habib Omar Sumait, and every year they hold a celebration for him to remember him. And he's so famous that his face is on the banknotes and also on the stamps. And he's very well respected. And from him, many great teachers came. He was really I like to refer him as an oak tree, and many great trees came from his teaching. In Sudan, you know, I call this squeezing in the frame. You know, I lifted up my camera to these school children and they all tried to squeeze in the frame. And what's nice about this picture is they all have their eyes on me. Muslims like to dance in their many forms. This is from Mevlana, Jalaluddin Rumi. Last night I begged the wise one to tell me the secret of the world. Gently, gently he whispered, be quiet, the secret cannot be spoken, it's wrapped in silence. And finally, I still refer to the lyrics of the poets, even today, from Yusuf, one of his old songs, but he still sings it now. Now I've been crying lately, thinking about the world as it is. Why must we go on hating? Why can't we live in bliss? 'Cause out of the edge of darkness, there rides a peace train. Oh, peace train, take this country, come take me home again. And from Sami Yusuf, this was him performing at London's Wembley Arena in front of 10,000 people. I can't read this, sorry, my text is hidden by the bar on the side, but you can read it. You can read it. And finally, in Xi'an in China, I got taken to this madrasa, and the people said to me, wait, the children are just getting ready. And I patiently waited while they got the children dressed up. And then these children came and sat in front of me. And then they started reciting Quran and songs about Islam and swaying backwards and forwards like this. It is such a beautiful image. It's one of my favorite images. I have it in my office here. It always cheers me up because just look at each of their faces. It's just amazing. And some of the boys have hats that are about 3 sizes too big for them. And you can imagine when they were swaying backwards and forwards, their hat was staying still, but they were moving. So I called it tick-tock to the rhythm of life. And finally, from the Diwan of Sidi Ibn Habib, he said, for if a person truly knew the worth of his heart, he would give all he had without hesitation. And if a person came to know the bliss within his soul, he would shed a tear of joy with every breath he took. And it's from his Diwan. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to come out of this now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. That was absolutely exquisite. Such extraordinary images, and to hear you recount the story in your beautiful voice, really, it was such Such a pleasure to be lost in these last 30 minutes in the beauty of your images and the selection of your quotes as well. Thank you for that, Joy.
I think part of that idea was to help young people, because, you know, I was young once, like everybody, and, you know, you're very involved in the culture, and it's trying to make sense of that. And maybe if you're a Muslim or you have your own particular religion you're connected to, how do you equate both those things? But I think people need to understand that God teaches us through the Quran and through the text that we know, but he's also teaching us all the time. Every day we're being taught. It's not separate, and we must remember that. You know, I think young people sometimes get split by this idea that God is only in one thing and he's not in the other things. And, you know, we know God is everywhere and closer to us than our jugular vein. So we have a life for a reason. And so that was really the thinking behind this presentation and exhibition.
Beautiful. If I may ask a personal question about
Please.
your own calling to Islam, what was it that drew you to Islam? Was it an experience that you had, or something you read, or perhaps a friend's experience? What was that attraction for you towards Islam?
Yeah, it's an important question. I mean, as you saw from India, I was really looking at other religions. I went there on a search, and I didn't know anything about Islam before I went to India. And there was something that happened while I was in India, although at the time it was an experience, but I didn't take a lot of meaning into it. But you can see the wisdom of God, how he did it. I was on a station very early before dawn, and in India, those of you that know India, it feels like the whole of society is on the move. And you go on trains and the stations are packed with people. And it was a very busy platform, and there were people bustling with all their luggage and everything. And within this movement, I suddenly saw a woman roll out a prayer mat and start praying. Now, I'd never seen this before, but there was a stillness about her, and I went immediately over there, and there was a young man, and I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Oh, it's my grandmother. She's a Muslim. She's praying." And so you see, God showed me in a snapshot perfect stillness within confusion. And as a photographer, I took a mental image of that. And I think that must have stayed with me. So anyway, after traveling around India and looking at all the different religions and gaining some understanding, I think the simplicity of Islam, the belief in the oneness of God, the acceptance of all the prophets made complete sense to me. And as I said, it really was a leap of faith. I didn't know that much. And within about 3 weeks of accepting Islam in London, I went to Morocco and really met my first mountain, who's in the book, which has now become Meetings with Mountains. It's actually not the man on the cover, but he's the first person that I describe after the Prophet ﷺ, because I really feel like the Prophet ﷺ is the blueprint for the saints and the sages of our community. And so there in Morocco, I met Sidi Muhammad Habib, and I remember ascending those steps to his room. And I'd met gurus in India, and I'd met very charismatic people, but they referred to him as insan al-kamil, like the perfect human being. And I didn't know really what to expect. But when I entered his room and he was sitting very peacefully on his 4-poster bed, and you can see the pictures I took on that meeting, after greeting, and there was incredible peace in that room. It was tangible. I could feel this really in my being. And after being introduced to him, he said to me something which is really interesting. He said, now you have two imams or two guides, Prophet Muhammad and the Prophet Jesus. You know, he didn't separate what I came from, he joined it together. And there's great wisdom in that thing that he said. And that was my first meeting with him.
Amazing. Could you talk a little bit more about Meetings with Mountains and how this project started? What was the impetus for you to go on this journey to meet saints and sages? And also, I'm just curious, you've spent so much time with these incredible men and women. I just wonder, you know, what is some wisdom that you can share with us that you've learned from them, from their life, from their practice, from their sense of peace and calm and serenity? Of course, it comes from prayer and their immense sense of faith, but what is something that we can also take away, perhaps a practical tip that we can use in our own life, particularly right now?
Yeah. Well, how it started, to be honest, it wasn't conscious. I remember before I went to India, I read a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi, which was about a great teacher of India who introduced meditation into the Western world and traveled to the West in the 50s and was responsible for bringing meditation to Western countries. And I have since discovered that that book became one of Steve Jobs' favorite books. And in fact, it was distributed at his funeral. So I think the idea of that, and that book was really his journey around India, meeting saints. And so I think that planted a seed in my mind. And then years later, when I started traveling around the Muslim world and I met Sidi Imam Habib, and that, because I was a photographer, I ended up photographing all the people around him, and there were amazing people, blind beggars, scholars, a wide range of people, and many of them are in the first section of the book. And I met all these people, and because I was a photographer, I just photographed them, but I wasn't consciously thinking this was a book. And then it grew, and as I traveled, I found out that Ibn Battuta, whenever he traveled to a new country, he always visited the saints and sages of that country first to take their prayers and blessings before he, you know, moved around the country. And I have always tried to do that wherever I've traveled. And so eventually it became a kind of book with just images, and I showed it to people, and then it grew, and then there was a small text, and then it became the thing it has become now, you know, which is a 385-page book, which has taken me 50 years from the beginning to the end to complete. What have I learned from them? I don't know, it's difficult for me to say, but there's certain things that are very consistent about them. One thing is that these people do not have egos. They are completely ego-free, which is a very rare thing these days. Another thing is that they have incredible humility. They do not think that they are anything. And that was why it was quite difficult. Many of them had never been photographed before, and not because they thought photography was forbidden. It's because they didn't want there to be something that made them appear as if they were something. It's from humility. And this is a very different position of saying photography is haram and these things that's been put on us for a long time. I think the other thing is that when you sit in their company, they have zero judgment of you. And that's very hard to understand when we live at such a time where people are making so many judgments on people online. You know, we live in a very judgmental society at the moment. These people are totally non-judgmental. And when you sit in front of them, they just see you at a certain point in your spiritual journey, and they pray for you. If you ask them, they'll give you advice. I often use this example about some people need to eat more and some people need to eat less. Some people need to work more and some people need to work less. And some people need to sleep more and some people need to sleep less. And those people know what your medicine is. It isn't the same for everybody because we're all different. And so they're like doctors of the spiritual world. You know, Sidi Muhammad Habib used to say that the whole world is a hospital and the saints and the sages are the nurses and the doctors. These are the doctors for our hearts. And that's why these people always within traditional societies, these people played a very important role. I think this is again something Sheikh Hamza pointed out to me, that in a modern society, the elderly have no economic value and therefore they have no value to the society. But always in a traditional society, the elders had the wisdom, and so people, the young, went to the elders when they had problems or things that they were dealing with, and they went to the elders to get their advice. But in an economic world, the elders don't have any value. So really this book was about trying to introduce the concept of these people as mentors or guides or back into the community again.
Well, thank you for doing that. There's certainly the doctors that we need right now to heal our hearts and put a balm on our souls. And I'm really looking forward to buying a copy of the book and enjoying the photographs and the prose. Perhaps I can ask one more question, and if there are others on the call, please write your questions in the chat or chime in. You know, you through your photographs, you want to show sort of the real essence of Islam. And just by viewing some of these photographs today, certainly I've been able to feel the essence of Islam through them, sense of gratitude and generosity, contribution, peace. I just want to ask you, in your own words, what are some of the values, the essence that you hope people take away from these photographs?
It might be something people don't think about, but there's something very human about these people. And we are part of humankind. But, you know, in times of crisis, it reminds us of our humanity, but some people react differently. And it's it's almost like putting a spotlight on us and, okay, this is to show who you are. I mean, someone asked me earlier, in an interview I did earlier about, about what are the benefits we can take from this time. And I have done personal retreats in the past. I did a couple, one was for 10 days. And what I experienced for the first couple of days is you feel like a lion or a tiger that's just been put in a cage and you're pacing around, you've lost your freedom, you've been curtailed. Then after a day or two, you kind of sit down. And then by the third day, you're looking at the small room thinking, well, this is quite a nice room. It's quite spacious. And the sun is shining in. And do you know what I mean? You accept your surroundings. And there's something very comforting in accepting that constriction. Because within constriction, your spirit can begin to soar. As we know in Ramadan, we're curbed, our eating habits are curtailed. And within that, after a while, once we get used to it, it's a beautiful time because the spirit begins to soar. And I think that's what I feel personally we should try and take from this period that we're in now. It won't last forever, and we'll probably slip back into our old ways very quickly. I hope not. The earth is breathing a great sigh of relief at the moment. I don't know whether it's just me, but every day it just seems so blue, and the birds, I hear them sing hearing the birds and seeing animals. And I mean, it is spring and it is also Shaban. It's, you know, these sacred months. So I think it's all part and parcel of the time we're in. But
thank you, Peter. I'd like to take a minute to introduce you to someone who's on the call, another extraordinary photographer from another corner of the world. He's in Dhaka, Bangladesh. His name is Shahidul Alam.
MashaAllah.
We had the pleasure of meeting him, interviewing him last Sunday on this Concordia Zoom call. And I think to me, it really reveals the essence of what Concordia is all about, which is connecting people, making the world a little smaller, even at this time when we are sitting in our corners of the world, isolated from each other, not able to meet each other, but we can meet through this conversation. And Shahidul, if you're there, please meet Peter Sanders. I think this may be the first time that you two are meeting, and it's extraordinary to introduce two photographers of such great talent.
Well, delighted to meet you, Peter, really. Absolutely blown over. Some of the images were absolutely mesmerizing, particularly the Hajj in 1971. That's a magical image.
Yeah.
But I'll actually talk about two things. One that you touched upon quite late, and that is about the economic value of the elders not being there. And at this point in time, that's particularly relevant because there are people who are sort of deciding whether it's worthwhile keeping elderly people alive, whether it is too expensive, and whether they should move away to make way for other people because they're expendable. And that really, in a sense, compares the different worlds. But my question is slightly different in the sense that you said that you went to India a year after 1970. Now,
71.
Make it 1971. Yeah. Now, in 1971, India was in the midst of this war. You know, it was the genocide, and you had 10 million refugees in India. Did that not in some way affect what you were doing? I mean, India was right in the middle of one of the most turbulent periods of modern history.
You mean with Pakistan?
Yes, I mean, India's war with Pakistan, but the genocide in Bangladesh, and of course, the 10 million refugees that India at that time sheltered.
Yeah, but you have to bear in mind, I went to Delhi, and then I went to Amritsar, and then everything else was south. So I didn't come across any of that. And I was kind of partly following, not a hippie dream, but, you know, in those days, either people went to India or they went to Morocco. It was quite fashionable to go to India. So I didn't, that was a whole other India that I was unconscious of at that time. I mean, I knew that it was going on, but it was not part of my quest. I was really on a spiritual quest to find a teacher. That was my whole purpose of going to India.
Okay. Sorry, go on. You were saying something, Salma?
No, you're gone.
Another question, Shahidul?
Yes, no, also, I mean, just generally, because looking at your work, I, of course, see the incredible range of work that you did, but you started off with music. And, you know, how has that stayed within you? Have you been able to make that connection? Because so much of spirituality is also linked with music in the sense. And I remember you also talking about photography being haram. I myself have been surrounded by that, and part of the quest has been to break that myth in a sense, which you've of course done very effectively. But I'm very curious to see, to learn about how music impacted your journey.
Very much so. I mean, as you can see from those early pictures, music was a very integral part of my life. As I said, you know, they were the poets of the time. And always in times of change, we go to the poets for guidance and wisdom. And so music was very important. And then I became a Muslim, and it was still there in the background, but not to the extent it was. And now I think I have a healthy balance of it. I mean, I do listen to music. There's specific things. I mean, I really like to understand lyrics, you know, because the poets really have something to say. And of course, music is, in every society you have music. It's very important. But there's, as the scholars say, there's music that can inspire you to do, I don't want to use the word demonic things, but, you know, I mean, these things can be used for good or bad. Same as photography, all the arts. And I think arts that remind us of something of a higher realm or something that inspires us is equally important. And I think times like this, where we're feeling confined, music and art is very important.
Just to lead on to that, at a later image, you photographed Yusuf Islam.
Yeah.
And there, of course, his music is very much about spirituality. In fact, some of his early songs were hymns.
Yes.
Which today are hymns of a different sort. Was there a particular rapport between you on that basis?
I've known him a long time, and to be honest, our lives have kind of crisscrossed. By the time he was very strong on the scene, I'd kind of gone off to India, and so I didn't have that. I mean, I knew about him, but I didn't have that connection. We met really once both of us were within Islam, and I went to those pictures of Sudan. I did that journey with him, and we traveled. He was at that time an ambassador for Muslim Aid, and so I traveled with him across Sudan, looking for ways that they could help the situation there. And so, and you know, we keep in touch now. He's a grandfather like me, and I'm so pleased that he went back to playing music again. And that's, you know, that's is a great gift he has, really, and he's doing amazing things at the moment.
Peter, thank you. Thank you so much. And so wonderful to connect to you and Shahid in this way. I just,
Yes.
I'm conscious of our time. We just have a minute or two. I just want to go to our chat. There's so many lovely comments and a couple of questions. I'll just read them very quickly before we move on. Sonia says, beautiful and inspiring sessions. So many takeaways to reflect upon. Thank you so much. Nuzat says, loved meeting you 17 years ago when you were the wedding photographer for my younger brother, Abdul Majid. Truly a unique wedding album, I'm sure. Rahima says, Peter's pictures are the main reason I visited Bosnia, China, and partly Mauritania. Thank you, Sidi Peter, for always inspiring me. Uzma sends her best regards as well from DC.
Yes, we're trying. Tell her I'm trying to get in touch with her. I need her at the moment.
Okay, I will definitely. I think she's on the call. And one last, such an insightful question. I'd like to just take a minute to ask you, what is your advice for someone for their own search?
Well, a great Taoist said, you know, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. You just have to set off. It's God is the journey. I mean, he's not at the, he's every part of the journey, at the beginning, the middle, and the end. So, and he is the guide, you know, one of his names is Al-Hadi. So if you ask him, he'll guide you. So we must always remember that. And it's a beautiful journey, really. And we're very blessed, all of us. Everyone's on it, whether they know it or not. But as George Harrison said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So try and identify the road you want to be on.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I think that's a wonderful place to end for now. I hope we have many other opportunities to continue this conversation. Peter, thank you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for organizing this. It was really a pleasure and an honor to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're moving on to our next session with Kausar and on storytelling. So I'll hand it over to you, Kausar. Bye-bye.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for having me. I've been on most of this morning, so I hope everyone can hear me, and well, I hope this will work.